So how about we start with your masters?
It was actually a master in video games.
Right.
So,
right.
and
Okay.
it was a very good master. It was during the pandemic, and it was very good in the
Where,
sense
where was that?
it was in the Netherlands, in I don't know how to pronounce it, Breda, Breda, I know, in the south. And I really liked that master in that it was fully online, and there were not a lot of classes, just one day per week. So I could really learn on what I wanted. So what I did in the end, since that master was then very centered around the thesis, I just said, I'm going to pick a crazy topic, and I'm going to study that and do that. So in the end, I ended up pushing a sort of robotics topic into video games master.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to defend. Actually, one of the hardest part of the master was to defend why was that useful for video games at
really?
all.
Oh, right. But you made models of birds flying and stuff like that, and that's an example of swarm intelligence, right? So what can you describe what swarm intelligence is?
Yes. So swarm intelligence, I think it can have several definitions, but usually the most used one really relies on saying we get inspiration from nature, we get inspiration from natural swarms, and then we try to extract intelligent properties or intelligent behavior that we can apply then to other systems. A good example is metaheuristics, which is essentially a bunch of algorithms that are used to optimize. A good example is particle swarm optimization. That what it does really is you spawn a bunch of particles in the mathematical realms, and you want to optimize a function. Then what you do is that each particle has a value, and then through iterating, these particles know what the other particles' values are, and then according to that they adapt. So through this communication, through knowing what the other particles have as their value, they can end up iterating and find their target. And the target in this case would be the local minima in this mathematical function.
Yeah.
So this is, for instance, in metaheuristics, but we can also talk about swarm robotics, which what they do is applying these, again, these natural behaviors that we see in these swarms, and then we apply them to robotics.
Right. So with the metaheuristics thing, you've essentially got like a graph space, and you've got lots of individuals within that space. And the way it works is that they are communicating just with the local individuals in the space, is that right?
Well, it depends. In the case of particle swarm optimization, I think there may be variants, but the main standard algorithm, I think the communication is global.
Right.
In that they know what the global best is.
Yeah.
They always know what is the best particle.
So they basically move towards that particle.
Yeah, it has a weight. Yeah.
Right.
Attached to it.
And the particle that's at the global best point will be moving to following the slope as well, right?
So yeah.
it's trying to get to the best position as well.
Yeah.
Or do they all go to the average? No, there's just one particle that's the best one, and they're all moving towards that. But that particle itself is moving as well. So I guess all of them are they all evaluating two things, essentially the best point and where it's best to go for them.
Exactly.
At that point.
Exactly.
And does that technique provably find better minima than other techniques? I mean, is it a good method?
Well, this is how good each technique is quite discussed. But yeah, particle swarm optimization has its fame it's very used in several domains. But there are many other competing algorithms, and of course each one has their own advantages. You may have heard of genetic algorithms. Yeah. They use a similar approach where they iterate, and then according to their values, they go through a process of natural selection. That's why they're called genetic. But there are also many variants. And in terms of swarm intelligence, you can have the. I was reviewing them some time ago, and you can have the.
Because of course this topic is very important now, because it's essentially how AI works, right? Finding the best minima and maxima.
Yes. And actually, that's in many ways why this branch of swarm intelligence is the most famous one, because it's so related to how reinforcement learning works, and it's even used in many types of machine learning.
Yeah.
Even myself, I just did a very small machine learning model without any kind of neural network. We just did this sort of optimization to tune the controllers of the swarms. So in a way, I was using both sides of swarm intelligence, because I was using the optimization part to optimize the swarm robots themselves, or swarm agents in this case, because they were virtual. There were no robots involved.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Because with this kind of stuff, my feeling is that when I did my biology degree, I created interactive games, essentially, where you were presented with generations of moths, and each generation would be bred from the previous generation, and what I got was students that didn't know, anything other than they were supposed to score as many points as possible. In the computer labs in the university, I got lots of students, and they're all trying to maximise their points in this game. And by doing that, you could see the evolution of the moths. So I did two different experiments. One where essentially the moths will become more camouflaged, and it will be harder to find them through the generations. And another one where I had two different moth species, one that you gain points for and one that you lost points for.
Okay.
And the one that you lost points for had a very distinctive look. And so what happened was, it's called Batesian mimicry. The other species actually evolved to look more like the one that you lost points for, right? Because then you don't know which one.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And doing it really struck me how powerful evolution is as a mechanism for designing stuff, because you don't actually need to tell it what you're aiming for. It gets there. All you have to do is define the scene, which you gain points for, which you lose points for, and that's it. And then it evolves the best solution. And it really strikes me that it's evolution like that isn't being used very much at the moment, and that you have AIs that are designed by people, but I've not seen very much work done on actually evolving AIs.
Well, I'm definitely no expert in this field, but I think there are already many approaches related to applying, like the example I mentioned before of genetic algorithms. But I think there's also a branch of evolutionary algorithms that, of course, yeah, they're very simple in that what they are trying to evolve are not a lot of values. Like I think one of the beautiful things of evolution is really that we're tackling a lot of genes, like a lot of genes, and it's so complex, so big that anything can happen, right? But let's say we are trying to do smaller steps in this direction, where maybe what we're trying to evolve are just a set of 5 variables or 10 variables, but not 1,000 variables, like maybe the genes of a virus. Maybe there's probably a lot more to do in that direction. It's just it very quickly gets very complex.
Yeah. But we were talking earlier about modelling buildings and that kind of thing. You can model cities or whatever. Then you could actually do that where you model a building and then breed it so that you get variations on that building, and then essentially go through generations where you have virtual people using the building, and each generation it selects the ones where the people are most happy, essentially. So kind of like The Sims, you could use psychology research to work out what your equations are for how happy people are, and then you would evolve the building that had the maximum happiness score, for example. And yeah, I've not seen a lot of work done in that kind of thing.
I would say now that you were describing this, No, I actually think that there's a bit of it because I recall, for instance, very small experiments. I'm sure there are much more complex than that. But for instance, they were trying to evolve walkers, and so you have a very small neural network, and that really just I think it controls how these walkers would move, and these walkers are just a ball and then two sticks, and they have knees, and they can grow more. Let's say more how do I say it, like more bones. You can have more bones or less bones, and more knees. How bent are they in their default state? And so with that you can really evolve creatures and their movements and how they control them, and generation after generation. And in a way this is how also reinforcement learning works, in that if you get to if you reach a very a good spot, then you reinforce that behavior, and by reinforcing it also means that you're not reinforcing the other one. So this natural selection process, it ends up favoring the winners, like it happens in nature. So for the next iterations, the randomly spawned new versions will focus more on the winners, although you always need a little bit of randomness. Of course, there will be a little bit of the losers as well, because at some point maybe the losers actually were right all along, and the winners were just in a local minima, just trying maybe a slightly better. Like for instance, in the case of the walkers, an initially good strategy would be to just dive, and that's a good strategy. I mean, you get decently far. It's better than not being even able to walk. But at some point, this strategy is also not good. You need to actually stand and make steps. So that's why, in a way, the loser at that moment that is able to actually stand and walk a little bit, at some point will end up being the best generation. So I think that this is an example of this evolutionary paradigm.
It's interesting to think about how you could take that into the real world. So, you know about the work of John von Neumann in this. He defined kind of minimal machine, or what he thought was a minimal machine that could self-reproduce. And he was a brilliant man. And people have worked on this more now, and they've come up with even simpler versions. But I'm thinking like that when it comes to robotics, when you're talking about swarm intelligence and evolution, then it's really interesting to think about how with nanobots we might be able to essentially make machines where there is variation and they can reproduce in the von Neumann kind of style. Because if you were going to do something like terraforming Mars, or not even terraforming, because I think that's an almost impossible project, but build a city on Mars, for example, you could send robots where you could send nanobots where they could reproduce, but there's variety in them so that they evolve to best fit the environment that they land in over time. I don't know. This
is a very complex task. It is a very complex task because I think there are two. Just now, I think there are two main challenges in there. There probably are much more, but one is that they need to be self-sufficient. So it means they need to gather their resources. They need to be able to repair themselves, and they need to build more of themselves, so at some point reproduce, like bacteria would do. And the other challenge is how do you introduce these variations? So how do you introduce mutations? At what rhythm? What is a proper mutation rhythm? Because if it's too big, they're going to be unfit. But if it's too small,
I would see the biggest problem as just making self-reproducing nanobots, because I don't think anybody has made any machine that can completely reproduce itself. I mean, people have tried to make, for instance, 3D printers, where you can print with a 3D printer, but there's always like little parts that you have to add in. But it's not in theory possible to do that. And it's not impossible to do that, sorry. And when it comes to something like building big structures on Mars, then of course we've got to send the stuff there first of all. So you want the weight of that to be minimal because you've got to send it in a rocket. And if you could design such a nanobot that could reproduce and have that variety. Also, I think nanobots is a really good application potentially of swarm intelligence, because with bigger things, they can have enough brain power and they can be able to communicate such that they all know the big picture. They can all see what everybody else can see. Whereas with a nanobot, it might not be possible to do that because it's so small and it might just not have enough energy to communicate very far, for example. So then you need, to interact more with your nearest neighbours, especially, if you're in a very hostile environment.
Yes, I definitely agree that in the small realm, it might be even more applicable, the swarm intelligence paradigm. And to me, I was actually doubting in that nanobots in Mars actually, if there's not a liquid medium, I don't see maybe I would maybe say rather than nanobots, I would call them just very, very simple bots, like this reminds me as well of what we were saying before. How would they self-replicate? Like for instance, 3D printers, one of the main problems is the circuitry. Like you cannot print. Well, I'm sure there are some applications that could do that, but you cannot really print the wire, cover it, protect it, make even the more complex circuitry like the chips. You cannot print that for now. So nanobots actually could have just a much more simpler design where they really are made of instead of, let's say, 100 materials, just 10 or just 5. Even 2 or 1, like we saw the metallic. That's the metallic robot that can shapeshift, right?
Yeah.
So if that metallic robot really finds a way of locally interacting with other robots of that kind, of the same kind, they already have a lot to gain, because with this small interaction they can benefit from swarm intelligent behavior, and since they are so simple, really, their self-replication should also be decently simple.
Yeah.
So maybe there we could have these sort of systems coming to life.
That's a really interesting point about there not being liquid, and of course nanobots are much easier within liquid. The process of reproducing and moving about and all that kind of thing is much easier there. And of course on Mars you have frozen water, which is a big problem. How do you get enough water? But I'm just thinking about, Freeman Dyson, the astrophysicist. He talks about, I think he's talking about the moons of Jupiter or something like that, and sending or creating things that essentially use mirrors to make light. I think in the lecture that I saw, he was actually talking about making biological organisms to do this. But if we think about nanobots, then part of the initial process would be making water, I would have thought. So you would need some kind of process to gather solar energy to do that. It's a really interesting problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
but because I think the whole idea of terraforming Mars, people talk about it as if it's a possible thing to do, but we have big problems changing our own climate, right? And if we can't do it here, then there's a chance of doing it.
Yes. Actually, yes.
It's a project that's so big. I think it's just completely beyond mankind at the moment.
Yeah,
but we could make buildings that we could live in that are sealed, and we can send robots to do that.
Yes,
so that's your job. Invent those robots.